Success is not the key to happiness. Happiness is the key to success. If you love what you do, you will be successful. 5, 10, 20 years ago, I couldn't have imagined that en bonjour I would be here talking about economics, the subject that I love the most. Well, economics never made it in the Indian households as a subject, as children were never encouraged taking it. But let me tell you that economics is the next big thing that is happening. Economics is those things that matter to all of us in our everyday life, and it touches every facet of our life. It's about the significance that the public policy decisions affect us today, which was originally formed by some sort of economic theories. Economics teaches us how to ask the right questions, and that is inherently related to critical thinking. Why the issue exists and how to face it and fix it is what is economics. It helps us to understand what goes on in the world. So where does economics take you? Economics takes you in every field of our lives: environment, technology, education, banking, everywhere. You name it and we are there. But does economics, as a student, if you pursue it as a subject, would you be an economic advisor? Much more, in fact, than that. Economics touches our everyday life so beautifully that people from different backgrounds, different cultures, diverse thinking together come to talk about the same topic in one language where we can debate and respect each other and make progress. You might have heard of the terms like inflation, poverty, unemployment, rich, poor. All these are topics that we hear in our everyday life. But knowingly or unknowingly, you are talking a language called as economics. So economics is associated in our lives, and it is interrelated with every subject that we study in our careers. As I said earlier, from environment to technology to education. So please encourage children to pursue economics as a subject, because it has life, and it will give you life much more than what you expect. Our representatives from Oberreddy Public School, our 12th graders, have beautifully crafted interesting things about what is economics and why is it an important day, and why are we making a debut in our school on this day. So let's get
We step into 2021, the economy is actually giving us very great news.
0.4% growth. This is the first time the economy has shown some signs of growth since the lockdown.
The government has also offered interest-free loan worth 10,000 rupees through prepaid cards to employees.
Country's foreign exchange reserves, they have surged by $4.34 billion to $581.2 billion in a week.
Overall, up until March, the recovery had proceeded very well.
In the last 3 years, there has been job destruction in the country.
The Reserve Bank of India, RBI, on Wednesday announced a slew of measures to help the services industry tide over the second coronavirus.
Retail inflation has also now skyrocketed to a 6-month high of 6.3%.
मई में थोक महंगाई दर 12.94% पर पहुंच गई है, जबकि मई 2020 में WPI आधारित थोक महंगाई दर
2020 నివేదిక ప్రకారం మానవాభివృద్ధి సూచీలో భారత్ 131వ స్థానానికి పడిపోయింది.
As we have seen, we hear the word economy very often around us in news, newspapers, on the internet and so on. But do we know what it actually means? Some of us are curious about how currency is made. Have you ever wondered why a dollar is equal to 74 rupees? Or why the price of petrol keeps fluctuating? Economics is the subject that answers these questions. Economics is a social science which studies the way a society chooses to use its limited resources, which have alternate uses, to produce goods and services and to distribute them among different people. The main reason for study of economics can be simplified to a single word: scarcity. Let's take a simple example to understand this. Let's say you have a sum of 50 rupees that you can either spend on ice cream or a soft drink, and you want both of them. Now, you might have three problems. Firstly, you have limited resources, that is 50 rupees. Second, you want both the ice cream and the soft drink. Third, you could use 50 rupees to buy only soft drink or only ice cream. Economic problems which require the study of economics are quite similar to the above situation. Economic problem is a problem of choice involving satisfaction of unlimited wants out of limited sources that have alternative uses. The subject economics is all about making choices in the presence of scarcity. The subject of economics has been studied under two broad branches: microeconomics and macroeconomics. Microeconomics studies the behavior of individual units of an economy, like a particular consumer or a firm, while macroeconomics studies the behavior of aggregates of the economy as a whole, like national income or aggregate output. Let's take an example to understand this. Consider the education system of the nation. Our school is a single unit of the education system. It has its own rules, regulations, and ways of functioning. Meanwhile, our education system is divided into various boards that have lakhs of schools working under them. Analyzing a single school would be quite different from analyzing the education system as a whole. The economy is quite similar to this situation. While it has micro units like firms, classes of consumers, and groups of producers, all these units are a part of some aggregate, like a nation or a sector of economy. This is why the subject of economics is divided into microeconomics and macroeconomics.
Hello everyone. Like Tyler Cowen once said, economics is everywhere, and understanding economics can help you make better decisions and lead a happier life. So, today we will be presenting on National Statistics Day. In this presentation, you'll see the history of economics and how it came into being as a discipline, the careers you can pursue with this subject, and finally, we'll also give you a glimpse into the day in the life of an economist. So let's talk about the father of economics. Economic thought goes as far back as the ancient Greeks and is known to have been an important topic in the ancient Middle East. Today, Scottish thinker Adam Smith is widely credited for creating the field of economics. In fact, the first methodical study of how economies work was undertaken by these French physiocrats. Smith believed that competition was self-regulating and governments should take no part in business through tariffs, taxes, or other means unless it was to protect free market competition. Many economic theories today are, at least in part, a reaction to Smith's pivotal work in the field, namely his 1776 masterpiece called The Wealth of Nations. In this book, Smith laid out several of the mechanisms of capitalist production, free markets, and value. Now let's talk about the dismal signs, Marx and Malthus. Karl Marx and Thomas Malthus had decidedly poor reactions to Smith's treatise. Malthus predicted that growing populations would outstrip the food supply. He was proven wrong. However, as he didn't foresee technological innovations that would allow production to keep pace with a growing population, Marx took his ideas further and became convinced a class war was going to be initiated by the inherent instabilities he saw in capitalism. Despite his overly rigid theory, Marx did accurately predict one trend, which was that businesses grew larger and more powerful to the degree that free market capitalism allowed. Now let's go to the marginal revolution. As the ideas of wealth and scarcity developed in economics, economists turned their attention to asking more specific questions about how markets operate and how market prices are determined. English economist William Stanley Jevons, Austrian economist Karl Menger, and French economist Leon Walras independently developed a new perspective in economics known as marginalism. Their key insight was that in practice, people aren't actually faced with big picture decisions over entire general classes of economic goods. Instead, they make their decisions around specific units of an economic good as they choose to buy, sell, or produce each additional or marginal unit. Marginalism quickly became and continues to remain a central concept in economics. Now let's talk about speaking in numbers. Walras went on to mathematize his theory of marginal analysis and made models and theories that reflected what he found there. General equilibrium theory came from his work, as did the tendency to express economic concepts statistically and mathematically instead of just in prose. Alfred Marshall took the mathematical modeling of economies to new heights, introducing many concepts that are still not fully understood, such as economies of scale, marginal utility, and the real cost paradigm. Now let's talk about Keynes and macroeconomics. John Maynard Keynes developed a new branch of economics known as Keynesian economics, or more generally as macroeconomics. Instead of marginal units or even specific goods, markets, and prices, Keynesian macroeconomics presents the economy in terms of large-scale aggregates that represent the rate of unemployment, aggregate demand, or average price level inflation for all goods. This theory says that governments can be powerful players in the economy and save it from recession by implementing expansionary fiscal and monetary policy, manipulating government spending, taxing, and money creation in order to manage the economy. Now let's talk about the neoclassical synthesis. The major contributors of this synthesis were Paul Samuelson, John Richard Hicks, and James Tobin. By the mid-20th century, these two strands of thought, mathematical marginalist microeconomics and Keynesian macroeconomics, would rise to near complete dominance of the field of economics throughout the Western world. This became known as the neoclassical synthesis, which has since represented the mainstream of economic thought as taught in universities and practiced by researchers and policymakers, with other perspectives labeled as heterodox economics. So the bottom line. Theoretical economics uses the language of mathematics, statistics, and computational modeling to test pure concepts that, in turn, help economists understand the truths of practical economics and shape them into governmental policy. The business cycle, boom and bust cycles, the anti-inflation measures are outgrowths of economics. Understanding them helps the market and government adjust for these variables.
Economics is around us in our day-to-day life. Well, is that statement true? Now, a few of my friends will share instances how economics is used in our daily lives. We'll start with personal financing. Then, we'll see what might happen if the value of the Indian rupee becomes greater than the value of the American dollar. And lastly, we'll learn about inflation, a common phenomenon.
Ever imagine what will happen if $1 was equal to 1 rupee? Then we'd probably be getting an iPhone for 900 rupees. But on the other hand, a booming service sector like IT sector will be running out of jobs. I'll explain you how. Let's suppose an engineer from India makes around 75,000 rupees per month. Considering $1 is now equal to 1 rupee, this engineer will now make $75,000 per month, while a US citizen will end up making only $4,000 per month. Then why would a company pay him a $75,000 when they can get another person for mere $4,000? So every Indian engineer, teacher, accountant, designer would be fired from their jobs, and jobs would move out of the country as workers are cheaper outside India. As people get removed from the jobs, plenty of other jobs that rely on them, such as restaurants, cafes, retail shops, tourism, airlines can go kaput.
Honestly, this is not a precise comparison. We tend to think that if the value of $1 equals 1 rupee, then the Indian economy becomes stronger, similar to that of the US. By that logic, 1 Bangladeshi taka equals 1.3 Japanese yen. That certainly doesn't mean that Bangladeshi economy is stronger than Japan. This is the reason why the RBI is very careful not to let rupee too strong. It is to India's advantage that $1 equals rupee 70. It helps keep exports high, wages high, and imports low. The countries that are export-oriented prefer weaker currencies. Countries like China that manufacture a lot of goods will prefer to have a weaker currency, so that other countries will prefer to purchase Chinese goods. On the other hand, import-oriented countries would prefer to have a stronger currency. If their currency is stronger, then it would be cheaper to buy from other countries. Our economy will be in disarray if both the currencies are equal. Thus, there should be a healthy mechanism to balance the currency tussle.
Hello everyone, this is Pratiksha from 12G. Today, let's have a look at how the banking system works. Have you ever wondered where the money that you deposit in the banks go? And why are the banks willing to pay you interest on your deposits while they do all the hard work of keeping your money safe? Let's have a look at it. You deposit a small amount of money in the bank and earn a small amount of interest. The banks use the same money for lending loans to others who are in need of it and charge a much higher rate of interest on it. It is the difference between the interest that they charge from the borrowers and the interest that they pay to the depositors that becomes the profit that the bank earns. And this is the very reason why the banks are willing to pay you interest on your deposits. In order to earn more money and be able to give out more loans, the banks need to attract as many depositors as possible, because deposits are what create loans. Every country has many banks, but every country has one central bank that controls and supervises the activities of all the other banks in the country. A central bank has many functions. It supervises the activities of all the commercial banks in the country. It prints money and issues this money to the public. It also looks after the foreign exchange of the country, accepts damaged notes from the public in return of new and fresh notes, and there are numerous other functions of the central bank. The Central Bank of India is the Reserve Bank of India. When there is excess supply of money in the market, the Reserve Bank of India borrows money from the commercial bank and pays interest, which is called the reverse repo rate. Just like how we borrow money from the commercial banks too sometimes borrow money from the Reserve Bank of India, and they pay an interest which is called the repo rate. When the repo rate is too high, the commercial banks begin to reduce their borrowings from the Reserve Bank of India, and they also raise the interest that they charge from their borrowers. And it's obvious that when the rate of interest is increased, the number of borrowers too decrease. When the number of borrowers decrease, there's a fall in demand in the market, which also causes a fall in the economic development.
The price of a notebook was around 1 to 2 rupees at the time of our parents' childhood. Now, the price of a standard notebook costs rupees 40. This phenomena of rise in prices as time progresses is called inflation. Inflation means a general rise in the prices and fall in the purchasing value of money.
Inflation can be caused by economic boom, that is, economic growth. When there is growth in the economy, people have more money to spend, leading to increase in demand for products and therefore increase in prices. Let us understand this with an example.
Let us picture an aeroplane with 90 economy class seats and 10 business class seats. If all the passengers are given money, all of them will demand for business class seats. Since there are only 10 business class seats available, the airline company will increase the prices so only those with enough money will be able to purchase these seats. Inflation can also be caused due to increase in prices of raw materials, increase in employee salaries, and currency depreciation.
Have you ever thought of the existence of a currency note worth $1 billion or trillion? Many would think that isn't possible, but it happened in Zimbabwe in 2008. Around that time, Zimbabwe went into a period of hyperinflation. The currency of Zimbabwe was losing its value at such a rapid rate that the government had to print billion and trillion dollar notes. And do you know what the value of 1 trillion Zimbabwe dollar was? It was equal to $1 US. This happened due to the excessive printing of notes by the government. Inflation in Zimbabwe finally came to an end with direct intervention by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe that repriced the currency, pegging it to the US dollar.
The government also issued regulations that shut down the country's stock exchange.
The worst case of hyperinflation ever recorded occurred in Hungary in the first half of 1946. By the midpoint of the year, Hungary's highest denomination bill was the 100 quintillion pengo, compared to 1944's highest denomination, 1000 pengo. The situation was so dire that the government had to introduce a new currency that was used explicitly for tax and postal payments, and was adjusted each day via radio. The pengo was eventually replaced that year in a currency revaluation, but it is estimated that when the currency was replaced in August 1946, the total of all Hungarian notes in circulation equal to the value of 1/1000th of a US dollar.
Is inflation bad? Inflation cannot be avoided. Individuals can save up money and reduce expenditures, but their salaries will keep increasing, therefore leading to inflation. Deflation or decrease in the prices can lead to unemployment. In the absence of expenditure from the public, companies will get into losses, and this will finally lead to unemployment. An optimum level of inflation is therefore necessary.
What is personal finance? Personal finance is a term that covers managing your money as well as saving and investing. It encompasses budgeting, banking, insurance, mortgages, retirement planning, and tax and estate planning.
All comes down to your individual incomes, expenses, living requirements, goals and desires, and to come up with a good financial plan which helps you achieve those goals, dreams, and aspirations within your financial constraints.
To make the most of your income and savings, it's important to become financially literate so you can distinguish between good and bad advice and make smart decisions.
Personal finance is both sustainable and it helps to curb the global consumerism craze which has taken over our lives.
Here's a few personal finance strategies. Number 1. Devise a budget. A budget is essential to living within your means and saving enough to meet your long-term goals.
Aside an emergency fund, it is important to pay yourself first to ensure you have money set aside for medical bills, car accidents or car repairs, any unexpected events that could occur. So on a rainy day, you would have money and you would not have to scavenge to gather personal finances.
Number 3. Limit debt. It sounds simple enough. To keep debt from getting out of hand, don't spend more than you earn. Of course, most people do have to borrow from time to time, and sometimes going into debt can be advantageous. For example, if it leads to acquiring an asset. Taking out a mortgage to buy a house might be one such case. Still, leasing can sometimes be more economical than buying outright, whether you're renting a property, leasing a car, or even getting a subscription to a computer software.
To use credit cards wisely. Credit cards themselves can be major debt traps, but it is unrealistic to not own one in this contemporary world. There are apps beyond just buying things. These applications can be used to track credit rating and keeping track of your spending, which can be huge budgeting aids.
Number 5. Monitor your credit score. Credit cards are the main vehicle through which your credit score is built and maintained. So watching credit spending goes hand in hand with monitoring your credit score.
Consider your family. There are expenses such as insurance that need to be paid, such as health insurance, life insurance, car insurance, fire insurance, etc. These insurances are necessary, especially in the modern family in modern day. And we must save our money to ensure that we can pay for these throughout our family's milestones.
Number 7. Give yourself a break. Budgeting and planning can seem full of deprivations. Make sure you reward yourself now and then. Whether it's a vacation, a purchase, or an occasional night out of town, you need to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Doing so gives you a taste of the financial independence that you're working so hard for.
What are personal finance principles? 1. Prioritization. This means you're able to look at your expenses, discern what keeps the money flowing in, and stay focused on these efforts.
Assessment. This is the key skill that keeps professionals from spreading themselves too thin. Ambitious individuals always have a list of ideas about other ways they can hit it big, whether it is a side business or investment idea. While there is absolutely a place and time for taking a flyer, running your finances like a business means stepping back and honestly assessing the potential costs and benefits of any new ventures.
Restraint. This is the final big picture skill of successful business management, which can also be applied to personal finance. Numerous times, financial planners sit down with successful people who still manage to spend more than they make. We must all exercise restraint to ensure we do not spend our precious finances on useless things which will serve absolutely no purpose in the present or in the future.
Hello everybody, I'm Sanjana Mallar of 12G and I'm here to talk about the role of RBI in credit control. Credit control is one of the most important functions of RBI. There are two methods employed by RBI for credit control: quantitative method and qualitative method. Quantitative method is designed to regulate the volume of credit, and qualitative method is designed to regulate the flow of credit. Quantitative method includes bank rate, open market operations, and legal reserve ratio. Bank rate. It refers to the rate of interest at which RBI lends funds to the commercial banks. At the time of inflation, RBI increases the bank rate, so the borrowings become costly. And at the time of deflation, RBI decreases it. Then coming to open market operations. Open market operations means buying and selling of government securities by RBI from the commercial and public banks. So what do we understand by sale and purchase of securities? Sale of securities. At the time of inflation, RBI sells the securities in the open market. So the resources with the commercial banks reduce and they are not in a position to lend anymore. So the aggregate demand falls. Purchase of securities. At the time of deflation, RBI purchases these securities in the open market. So the resources with the commercial banks increase and they are in a much better position to lend. So the aggregate demand starts rising. Then the next one is legal reserve ratio. Legal reserve ratio is another very important method employed by RBI for credit control. It includes cash reserve ratio and statutory liquidity ratio. Cash reserve ratio. It refers to the ratio of bank deposits that the commercial banks have to keep with the RBI. At the time of inflation, RBI increases the rate of cash reserve ratio, and at the time of deflation, it decreases it. Then coming to statutory liquidity ratio. It refers to the fixed percentage of assets that the commercial banks have to keep with themselves in the form of cash. At the time of inflation, RBI increases it, and at the time of deflation, it decreases it. The qualitative method. It includes marginal requirement, moral persuasion, direct action, and rationing of credit. Marginal requirement. Marginal requirement refers to the difference between market value of loan and security value of loan. At the time of inflation, RBI decreases the marginal requirement to discourage more and more funding by commercial banks. And at the time of deflation, it increases it to encourage more and more lending by commercial banks. The next one is moral persuasion. It refers to written or oral advices given by RBI to commercial banks to expand or limit credit. Direct action. Sometimes RBI takes direct action against those commercial banks which do not follow the rules and regulations of RBI. It cancels the registration or nationalization of these banks. Rationing of credit. It is related to limiting the size of credit issued by the commercial banks. Helps banks and financial institutions to recognize customers with a poor credit report and ensure that these are extended a line of credit. This eventually helps the lenders ensure to minimize the probability of customers not paying on time and increase profitable lending. Thank you.
You might have wondered what the purpose of studying economics is, or what roles do economists have in the workforce. If you're interested in studying economics, listen closely. Here are some career options for you. Let's go and see.
In recent times, there is a spike in career opportunities. Some of the common economic majors are economic consultant, economist, financial risk analyst, actuary, and development economics.
Economists. Economists are responsible to create financial and economic forecasts and models. They research economic issues, conduct surveys, and collect data. They analyze data using mathematical models, statistical techniques, and software.
Financial risk analysis. Financial risk analysis identify and analyze the areas of potential risk threatening the assets, earning capacity, or success of organizations in the industrial, commercial, or public sector. They may work in sales, trading, marketing, or financial
Economic
services.
consultant. Economic consultants analyze business organizations' economic statuses and propose plans to help improve and change their existing programs. They apply techniques of economic analysis to help businesses, regulators, and policymakers evaluate and implement strategic decisions.
Actuary. Actuaries are experts in evaluating the likelihood of future events using numbers. They are the leading professionals in finding ways to manage risk. It takes a combination of strong analytical skills, business knowledge, and understanding of human behavior to manage today's complex risks facing our society.
Development economics. Development economics is the branch of economics focused on understanding and promoting the development of low-income countries through economic growth and structural change. They also include international trade, globalization, sustainable development, the effects of epidemics, and the impact of catastrophes on economic and human development. Prominent development economists include Jeffrey Sachs, Amartya Sen, and Joseph Stiglitz.
The top jobs are working for charity or NGO. If one has knowledge of economics and skills such as quantitative analysis and statistics, then one can do important and helpful work for these organizations. Another option for working in development economics is to work for a global organization such as the United Nations.
Two people who still don't know how to handle money are staring in front of each other.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine.
I am your host Abhinav and welcome to the show Economics Breakdown, where we present you some of our finest reporters who report about economics but haven't even listened to even one economics class in their lives. The theme for today is about Mr. Mahalanobis, the father of statistics in India. Mr. Mahalanobis was one of the most revered statisticians during the independence era, and his most significant contribution being the Mahalanobis distance, which goes something like this. However, what we want to cover today is something more in detail. His contributions to the Indian economy and how the Indian economy had shaped since then. Truth be told, India is not at the greatest of positions, especially when it comes to the economy. Recently, I was asking Alexa what the temperature in Antarctica was, and it replied back the GDP contraction of India. And the Indian currency just keeps depreciating. At this point, I believe that the only way that the Indian rupee can get stronger is when it is made out of concrete. With jokes apart, we actually did not have any choice. The pandemic kept getting bigger and bigger, and it was difficult for India to adapt to the situation and tread accordingly. However, allow us to erase these thoughts and help you believe that there are geniuses unlike me. Allow us to help you believe that India can recover from the situation. Allow us to start Economics Breakdown. Let me present to you the first segment for today, Calculated Errors by Krish Saxena.
Good morning, one and all. My name is Krish Saxena and welcome to Calculated Errors, or as I would like to call it, my 10th grade exam papers. So we all know that 29 June is celebrated as National Economics Day. Well, maybe not everybody. Who am I getting? Hardly anybody knows that it's National Economics Day, but hey, we've gathered here to talk about it. I should probably give you some more info about it, starting by talking about the person because of whom we had this entire thing, because of whom we're having this amazing, this fantastic, this absolutely phenomenal, obviously very well-known day, which is National Economics Day. Mr. P.C. Mahalanobis. He was born on June 29, 1893 and was instrumental in formulating India's strategy in the second five-year plans. He was appointed the chairman of the National Income Committee in 1949. His work and thinking in terms of official and regional statistics were visionary. The professor made some fundamental contributions to the early development of non-parametric regression, with large data regression function of x on y can be calculated by averaging the blah 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 blah. I would like this to be inclusive for all kinds of students, not only the math ones. I honestly do feel bad for the math students. They spend 20 minutes on a single sum just to realize they calculate in radians and not degrees. And that is why I've received such amazing messages such as this from my friends. The professor was also not comfortable talking about structural and parametric restrictions which were arising from the economic theory. In a similar way, we also do not feel comfortable answering questions in class. Now, I know that constantly listening to my voice, even though it is amazing, can be annoying. So I've brought about an expert in the field who's graduated from JNU, Jaideep Nanapalli University. And let's have a huge round of applause for Deekshita. Thank you for coming here, Deekshita. So, as we all know, the second 5-year plan was announced in 1956 and it was named the Mahalanobis Plan after Mr. P.C. Mahalanobis. It was influenced by the USSR's industrial advancements. Did you know that? Is this Russia's response to ISKCON? Are they trying to get revenge for spreading Hinduism in Russia through that? This is why the second 5-year plans have failed miserably. It's Russia who's controlling us all in the end.
I'm so sorry, but I would love to differ because, well, what you're saying isn't the entire truth. This plan, which is actually an industrial and transport plan, has increased our national income. It has taken our national income from 11,670 crores to 14,140 crores. Let that sink in. So I'm sorry, I don't think the second 5-year plan was actually a grand failure.
So that means there is more money to be lost in the stock market to Russian brands. They're trying to affect our economy by making us buy more of their products as well, maybe. Or maybe that's just my cousin's problem. He has a drinking problem. I should probably tell him to stop buying so much vodka.
That's not only it, it also has a very big major achievement in the industrial sector. Not only did it create more than 9.5 million jobs in our country, but it also led to many production which we use in our day-to-day life right now, such as printers, tractors, motorcycles, bikes, antibiotic drugs, DDT, and etc. So I really believe that the second 5-year plan benefited us more than we would rather accept it. So it actually led to our overall development and growth and our goal towards self-sustenance.
But what about the constant widening inequality?
I'm sorry, the constant widening what?
You know, the inequality in the distribution of national wealth. Unlike the first, the second plan was characterized by a persistent rise in prices. Over the 5-year period, the rise in general index of wholesale prices was about 30%. So food articles as a group had gone up by 27%. Do you know how much money it would cost me to make my homemade meat trifle then? I guess I was just thinking about it, but not gonna lie. Well, industrial raw materials had also increased by 45% and manufacturing had increased by over 25%. So if, just imagine, I wanted to make another factory to illegally manufacture my handbags, it would cost so much more. And honestly, I just wish the previous ones hadn't burned down in Delhi. Well, in the end, I guess the second 5-year plans were successful. Not in all aspects, but they were successful. And to quote a great man, there is no such thing as perfection, because once there is perfection, where else can you go? A great man called Roy Mustang had said that once. And that's where the segment ends. And I know, you must be crying. It's alright, don't be sad that it's ending. I mean, it is on YouTube, you can just press rewind and you can listen to me all day long if you want. And until then, I'm Krishkaran Saxena, and this has been Calculated Errors. I hope you'll enjoy the later segments that are going to be brought to you by my teammates, and I hope you'll enjoy the very next segment that is going to be presented by my teammates Sejal and Ketan. Thank you.
So today's special correspondents, Ketan and Sejal, will be going back in history and showcasing you what exactly happened in 1991 to the Indian economy. So what was the situation back then?
Back then, India was forced to confront the severity of its economic problems in 1991, when it was left with enough currency to cover around 2 weeks of imports. Inflation soared to 17% per annum. Industrial production was falling and overall economic growth had declined to 0.9%. Loans were arranged to the IMF and the World Bank. The government was forced to allow more foreign investment and reduce trade restrictions. But now let's go back to the 1960s and see how the crisis and reforms came to be. Major changes led to this situation. Starting with
the Green Revolution.
So the 1960s food crisis forced the government to stop ignoring agriculture. It adopted new technology, which included high-yielding seeds and large inputs of fertilizers that led to the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution of the 1973's agricultural growth to 2.9% by 1999, but industrial growth slowed between 1976 and 1980. When the Congress came to power in 1991, the country was essentially bankrupt with foreign exchange reserves barely sufficient to finance the country. We entered the 1990s with lots of economic turbulence. How did the government step up to fix the economy?
To fix the economy, we started with heavily devaluing the rupee. Direct foreign investment was once again welcome, though it was still controlled. And the reforms lifted the overall growth rate, exports, foreign reserves, and capital. The savings and investment rates also rose. Poverty came down, and banks were nationalized.
India managed to sustain a growth rate of 4% per annum from 1960 to 1990. This may have been largely due to industrialization policies and the Green Revolution.
That, everyone, is the story of India's accomplished disaster, the economic reforms, brought to you by S&K. And now, moving on to our final member, Angel.
Well, I do not quite agree with your criticizing views. India was wide awake. India did prevail. India did overcome. The budget of 1991 is a trademark to the changing fortunes of the Indian economy, which at the time was almost near bankruptcy. The external debt, the debt borrowed from foreign agencies, pegged at 23% of GDP, and internal public debt, the debt taken from within the country, amounting to 55% of the GDP. The fiscal deficit, the expenditure of government becomes more than its revenue, was 8% of the GDP. The wholesale price inflation, the decreasing purchasing power, the power to buy goods and services for public goods had risen by 13%, and retail inflation, the increase in the cost of goods and services, went even higher up by 17%. The foreign exchange reserve, which is foreign currencies, gold reserves, treasury bills, etc., retained by a central bank, was standing at a low rupees 2,500 crores, which was nearly 75% lower than what it was prevailing a year before in 1990. But India overcame that with strategies that no one could foresee: an economic shift to liberalization and the end of licensing, a system where private entrepreneurs had to take approval of many government agencies, a two-step devaluation of the Indian rupee, that is, reduction in the value of the rupee, mortgaging of Indian gold holdings, reworking the trade policy, and many more. India turned the crisis into an opportunity to change for the better. And where were you guys when the 2008 recession was happening? Crying not to go to the preschool, perhaps? They say that when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. But the impact on India was very muted. In India, we have strictly regulated market by active participation of financial regulators like the Reserve Bank of India, RBI. These regulators ensure that although Indian markets have exposure to foreign players, but at the same time have lesser vulnerabilities to global risks. Participatory notes or P notes is one of the measures taken by Government of India to control the foreign institutional investment. During recessions, stock markets see a sharp decline if foreign players pull out their investments. P notes is the key to check that. Some of the major Indian banks were nationalized in 1969. It facilitated the Government of India enforcing certain policies like high cash to reserve ratio, that is, the minimum reserve any commercial bank should maintain, strict credit policy, and regulation of lending rates. This control over banks has proven to be a boon to India as recession started in US due to the burst of the subprime bubble, which is charging higher interest to borrowers with low credit scores. In India, above policies prevented Indian banks from falling into this pitfall. India is one of the largest economies in purchasing power parity terms, that is, the ability of a group or community to buy goods and services. It has made India a preferred location for foreign direct investment (FDI). Large amounts of FDIs make the country strong and hence more resistant to global fluctuations. India has not only shown greater resistance during financial crisis, but it was also one of the countries showing the fastest recovery too. Crises take place everywhere, but what matters is that we overcome it. And India has always done that in spades. Thank you. Abhinav, take over.
Wow, I think that was pretty intense. While you're busy processing all the information that we gave you, here are some things that we want you to think of. Number one, is economics really an important subject to study? Is it really necessary in daily life to study? And number two, did India really go through a revolutionary change since the 1990s? Or is it just like any other change brought out by similar modern countries? It's something to really think about. With this, we leave you with a smile on our faces and hopefully yours as well. Until then, have a great day, and this is Economics Breakdown signing off.